Okay, so today we're going to be starting our unit on evolution, and the first part of that is evidence for evolution. So to start with, it's kind of a philosophical question of, where did we come from? And people have been asking this for a really long time, probably since the beginning of time. But the first guy who really tackled this was somebody named Charles Darwin, and he published this book, Origin of the Species, in 1859. And a couple of things to note about Darwin is that his big theory is that all life on Earth, every single creature, was descended from a single ancestor about 3.4 billion years ago. So just to cover evolution, it holds that all life originated from a single common ancestor. And when we're talking about evolution, what we mean is that this is the gradual change in the heritable characteristics of species over time. So in a lot of the questions that you'll see on your test, they're going to ask you, they might throw an acquired characteristic at you. So that's something like, did this person gain more weight because they ate a lot of food during their lifetime? So that would be acquired. It's not really heritable. It's something that they, acquired during their lifetime. Or if somebody worked out a lot and they gained muscle mass, that would be an acquired trait. So that's different than something that's heritable. So something like your hair color or your height, like you inherit that. You can't really change it. So evolution is a gradual change in the heritable characteristics of species, and then this is the key, over a long time. Evolution never occurs during a single lifetime. It's over a population, over hundreds or thousands of years. So just a throwback from our last unit in genetics, mutations are random, but natural selection, which we're going to learn about, is not. And so evolution is just about the traits that are passed down from parents to offspring, and the father of evolution is Charles Darwin, as I just said. Okay, so Charles Darwin was sort of an all-around nerd. He studied many different topics, including geology and both animal and plant biology. He would have referred to himself as a naturalist, so just somebody that studies the world in general. And these are some of his actual drawings. So he was familiar with things like, volcanoes. So he's drawing here what's happening to the land after there's a volcanic eruption, and he had gone to many different places where you can actually see the layers in the rocks over time. So he gets this concept of like the new covers the old, that landscapes change over time, right? So we know that these layers are stacked because it couldn't have gotten there any other way. So if there's a volcanic eruption, it's going to lay down one layer of sediment, and maybe there's an animal that is cruising around at that time and just happens to be in the neighborhood when another volcanic eruption happens, and unfortunately they die. But what we can tell is that, these layers represent distinctions in time, so different times, and that the youngest layers are at the top, and that as you move further down, you're going sort of back in time. You're becoming older as you go back. And even in Darwin's time, they were finding these really weird things in the dirt, things that we, now call fossils, right? So bones that are deep in the ground. Some of them were huge animals that looked something like, but still different than what we have today. But the important thing was that what they were finding underground did not exist anymore. These were animals that had gone extinct, even though they did bear some resemblance to some known species. So like this one here, we now know is an early ancestor of the bird, and you can see it looks like a bird. It's got the beak here and it's got some sort of wings. And this one, I thought maybe it was like a giant bear or something, but it's actually a giant sloth. They used to be this big. But they would find some other odd things. So sometimes they'd find sea creatures in stone in the middle of the desert, and even though it had, as far as anybody knew, it had been that way for a long time. So they didn't know quite how to explain that. And at the time, people thought that it was made up. People were like, oh, someone went out there and buried those shells, and Darwin thought this was like insane. Like, you really believe that these shells never existed? You think somebody actually ran out there to go bury them? He thought that was crazy. So again, here's just a comparison. Again, this is an early bird ancestor here. I can't say the name. It's like Arthropteryx or something. And this is a chicken. And so you can see that there is similarities in the beak structure, but this one is millions of years old, about 150 million years, and it's much bigger than a chicken. And if you look even closer, like say at this four-limb structure, so this is the dinosaur basically, and then this is the wing of modern chickens, and it's pretty close. I mean, it's almost identical. So then the question is, okay, well, how do you really know how old these bones are? Well, turns out we can, in addition to how deep they are in the dirt, we can use this thing called carbon radio dating, and this is going to give us the approximate age of these fossils. So living things are made of carbon. We have carbon in all of our biomolecules, so like the sugars, the fats, our nucleic acids all have carbon backbones. So after we die, we're no longer incorporating any new carbon, and so when that is solidified into the fossil, that carbon now has a half-life of 5,730 years, and over time it will decay to nitrogen-14. And so what people can do is measure the ratio of C12 to nitrogen-14 to estimate that age. So that's how radioisotope dating works, and they can get a pretty good guess at how old a fossil is. So the reason that they think that evidence, or that the fossil record provides evidence for evolution, is that the sequence in which fossils appear seems to match the expected sequence of evolution, and that when we still find some of these fossils that look similar to living animals, even though they themselves no longer exist. They're similar, but they did change, so it's saying that organisms can change over time. And so we can also take DNA from those fossils to compare that. So that's something new that we have in modern day age. We can actually see how the sequences themselves change. So Darwin at this time, he knows that fossils exist, and he's like, sees that they have these similarities. But he started with a more basic question, and his basic question was, can species change at all? And if you've ever, done any dog breeding or anything like that, you know that that is absolutely true, because humans do this all the time in a process called selective breeding, right? So, for example, you see this a lot in agriculture. So like the chicken, right? The mighty and noble chicken. So the average chicken today is about 4 times as heavy now as it was in the 1950s. So this is the average chicken in 1957 was 900 grams or so, and in 2005 it's now 4,000 grams. So it's more than 4 times as heavy. And the reason for that is that if you're a farmer, you kind of want more chicken meat for your chicken buck. So they only bred the largest animals, right? Because chickens are usually bred for meat. And over time, the average size of the birds are going to increase. And we see a lot of this in domestic animals. Probably the most notable one is with the dogs. So all dogs are descendant from gray wolves. And so I just wanted to show you what these guys look like, because they're huge animals, quite beautiful. And like you can just see like their color of their eyes is different than a regular dog. They're much larger than a regular dog. So humans got a hold of some of the friendlier ones of these guys and started breeding them. And so now we have, a totally different species and like many different breeds that look very different from the ancestral form, right? So these modern dogs were selected for really different jobs, some of them because, they were cute, but you can see just like in the facial structure how different they are. So like this pug here, his face is completely different from the wolf. The ears are completely different. The sizes of these dogs is really different. For all of them, it looks like domestic dogs have dark eyes instead of the lighter ones. And dogs were also bred for behavior. So we have hunting dogs who just love nothing more than to chase birds all day. We have whole breeds of dogs who are guard dogs. So the domestic dog was selected many times over for specific characteristics, not just in their looks but also in their behavior. And so we see this again with like pigeons. We all know what a pigeon looks like, but apparently there's 40 different breeds of pigeons, and you can make any animal look pretty ridiculous if you breed things out. So another evidence for evolution is in the selective breeding, because we can go from something like a pigeon and a wolf or a jungle fowl. So this was the the ancestor of the chicken, and we can, just through selective breeding, we can change those animals. So this demonstrates that selection of the offspring can change a species over time, resulting in evolution. So the answer to the question, can species change at all, is a definitive yes. We have been doing it for thousands of years with selective breeding, just for our domestic animals. Okay, so the evidence for evolution and selective breeding is going to be as follows: that it can be used to select for favorable characteristics. So we're looking for, things that we think are pretty in dogs, or behaviors that we like in the dogs, or, a big fat chicken. So the important thing is that it causes a significant change in the species over time from that wild ancestors. And it shows that populations can change over long periods of time due to that selective breeding. And the examples, again, include the wolves being bred to create domestic dogs, and the chickens being bred from that original tiny jungle fowl. And really, this applies to any domesticated animal used in agriculture. Okay, so I'm going to pause here.